Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's WOW session. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful summer Friday morning. Hopefully, you have coffee in hand and are wide awake for today's conversation. My name is Erin Miley. I am one of the business managers here at AIM. I'm going to be your host and presenter today, so wearing dual hats for today's conversation. So excited, which also means y'all better be prepared because high energy conversation coming your way. And yes, Jody, good morning. Jody's got it on tap. We are going to be keyboard aficionados today because I'm going to be asking participation from you. So, with that, I do have some support today because I am playing dual hats. I have with me today my coworker, Matt Weidman, who is going to be wearing the hat of my producer, just in case there's any technical difficulties. But he also may be joining me in the chat as well, and giving commentary throughout the conversation. Um, you can hear and see me, hopefully, but I cannot hear or see you. If you have not yet located that chat function, it is at the bottom of your screen. It should say chat. Go ahead and pop that on up for today. If you do not readily see it, you should see a more option with three dots in a circle. Pop on that as well, and you should see a chat option there. Good morning, everyone. All right, and if you want everyone to see your chat, you'll click, make sure it says to everyone. If you just want Matt to see your chat, go ahead and just click on host and panelists. All right, I think I've got our housekeeping done for today. Hopefully that gets us sorted before we dive into, yep, happy early Father's Day to everyone. Perfect. And because I have my chat up on the same screen as some of the slide deck, I just want to make sure it's not overlapping with anything else. So just making sure there's no black spots on the presentation. Can everybody see that okay as well? Perfect. Thank you, Melanie. All right. Matt, is your permission level not the same? Let me promote you real quick. Hold, please. Promote to co-host. Confirm. All right. We had some technical difficulties. All right. I think we're all good. I'm going to dive into the conversation. So with that, today is about giving you a practical way to think through people situations that land in your lap before they become fires, because nobody likes a fire. To get us going in the chat, as we are all already in there playing keyboard warriors, if you're willing, what's one employee relation situation you've seen go sideways because someone reacted just way too fast? And I know you all have examples. So go ahead and if you're willing, just go ahead and put that in the chat. And just an FYI, this is a judgment-free zone and we're giving everybody grace today. So spelling errors, no judgments on situations. It's we're giving everybody grace today. All right, while we go ahead and type that in, I'm going to go ahead and move us to the next slide. Everything is that slide number. Okay, there we go. All right, so with that, before I get into the framework, I want to make sure we're all looking at the same problem. Most of the employee relations situations I hear about didn't start in HR. They started in a manager's office, on a Teams chat, in a break room, on a shop floor, in a hallway. By the time they actually got to HR and got HR looped in, something had already happened. Yes, not bringing in HR early enough. Um, Situation occurs, the manager reacts, that step right there, the manager reacts, and then HR finds out, and then it's a now what situation. The goal today isn't to make you an employee relations investigator. It's to give you and the manager you coach a way to slow down the react step so it doesn't create the next problem. quick fire, but a good, but he's a good guy and what to bring back. Yes, we run into those situations all the time. Okay. I want to be upfront about the scope of today's session so nobody feels like they're missing something. I've recently been navigating around a situation about inaccurate PTO. This started with someone feeling that they had more hours available than HR has on record. It has now been 2 weeks of tense emails and interactions. Yep, I bet that happens often in our realm. All right, being upfront with the scope of today's session. This is about everyday situations, the gray areas, the coaching conversations, the decisions that happen before something becomes formal. We're not going into formal investigation procedure, legal process, or EEO guidance today. Those are real and important. They're just a different conversation. If you are needing or looking for investigation protocol, I'm happy to point you towards resources after today. We have obviously several at AIM. Obviously, if you've been here a while, you know that. Um, but today we're staying practical and accessible. Now, again, I think I know the answer, and we have a couple of answers coming in the door for a situation, but in the chat, if your organization in your organization, who's most likely to handle a low-level employee relations situation before it even gets to you, the HR person, or the HR or the person who's wearing the HR hat? And as we consider that conversation, concerns about an employee's pay, how it was determined, or how it makes them feel valued. Pay is never enough. That's a common situation that comes up with managers often. Yep. Plant or general manager. Our office and area managers, the ones that hit us first. Yep. Lead or direct manager. Common theme here, people. Manager, supervisor, plant manager, general manager, office, area managers, lead, direct super. Common theme, right? The managers end up being that first point of contact and they handle those questions first. Or complaining to another employee. That's Mary Lou, you put a good point out there. Complaining to another employee. All right. So I'm going to give you 4 questions. These aren't magic. These won't solve your employee relations situation for you, but they will make sure that you're asking the right things before you make a move. Question 1, is this a policy problem or a people problem? These need different responses. Combining or blending them is one of the most common mistakes we see when it comes to these types of employee relations issues. It's the muddying the waters of, is it a policy or is it a people problem? Question 2, who needs to know and who needs to not know? Confidentiality decisions made early saves enormous headaches later. And honestly, later on, it could be a legal issue. So who needs to be in the know? What does consistent look like here? If you'd handle this differently for someone else, that inconsistency is a risk. So if you didn't do it this way for somebody and you're doing it some way different for somebody else, obviously that's going to get you into a pool of hot water. What does documentation need to look like? Not did we document, but did we document the right things? If we don't know what we need to have in writing, then we may be putting something that is unnecessary and now discoverable for attorneys. And then also, maybe we didn't document the actual thing that we actually need. So keeping in mind these 4 questions right out the gate will help slow down those react options. We're going to see this framework in action with 3 real world scenarios, and I want to know what you do in these scenarios. Again, get your keyboards ready. I told you this is going to be some heavy chat time, all right? So think through, we're going to see this in real time. Now, this is the full framework. I'd encourage you to screenshot this, but I also know if you're not in a place to do so, be careful if you're like driving or seeing this in some place that you're not allowed to screenshot. Be safe. I will send this out after today's session, so you will have this as a takeaway. So if you are not in a place to screenshot this, don't worry about it. We're going to use this as our lens for everything that follows. So again, this is going to be, is it a policy problem or a people problem? We're going to need to clarify what we're actually dealing with before anything else. Who needs to know and who needs to not know? We're going to map the confidentiality before you involve anybody else. What does the consistent look like? Have we had similar situations? Could this be defended? I think like a lawyer sometimes. I'm not an attorney. This is not attorney advice, but I have an attorney lens because I always ask what it depends and could this get me could this get me in court? Um, and then what does documentation need to look like? Not the I know I need to have it in writing. I know that. That's always going to be a step. But did we have the right things in there? And do we have too much? Do we have the wrong things? And I don't want that to be in there. Um, the outcome at the bottom of this slide is what we're after. It's making a decision or escalating with confidence. It's not just reacting. We're going to keep this in mind as we go through the scenarios, and I'll come back to it after each one. Yeah, not attorney at law. All right. So here's our first scenario. I want you to put yourself in the HR seat here. So you are wearing your HR hat. If you're not HR, that's okay. Put your HR functionality hat on. So we're going to think through the scenario as we see it here. An employee complains to their manager about a coworker's behavior. It could be, you know, um, anything around, I don't like the way they smell or the way that they type on their keyboard. It's too loud, and it's distracting to my work. Or, hey, they put that widget in the wrong place and I don't like how they place it every single day. And they eat their food too loud and noisy. I don't know, anything. It could be whatever. Um, Manager pulls the employee aside and tells them just work it out. No HR involved. The manager genuinely thought he was being helpful, wants to diffuse the situation, has no idea he's genuinely creating a very large problem by just saying work it out. 2 weeks later, the complaining employee files a formal complaint. They claim the manager retaliated against them after the conversation. HR finds out through the grapevine, not the manager bringing it to them. So that one's the big one. The manager never said anything, never said that the employee had brought something to them, that they were complaining, that there was an issue that needed to be addressed. Nothing seems to be documented here because nothing's listed as documented until a formal complaint's being made. And that's not even being documented according to this. So, what would you quote your manager to do at this point? I'm letting you guys shut that in because I want to know what would you coach your manager to do? Because at this point they brought it up. Now I gave really weird scenarios here. I mean, chewing with your mouth to like tippity tapping on your keyboard is probably not like the best complaint, but did the manager even ask what the misbehavior was? Yeah, I that's a good question. Did they even dig deeper besides just saying just work it out? What kind of questions led to the just work it out conversation? That's a good question. The manager should be documenting the conversations that they have. Yeah. Take every complaint seriously and ask clarifying questions. Report earlier, gain understanding, exercise caution in discussions. get both sides of the story and maybe get the two people in the room. I like that one, Mary Lou. It's the getting two sides of the story and getting the people to mediate in a conversation. That's always a great idea. When HR finds out, begin the investigations and start with the manager. Manager should have documented and taken it to HR for assistance. Yep. People problem. So this is definitely a people problem, Jody. Yes. Manager needs to include HR as this might be a larger issue. Yes. So we don't actually know the underlying like coworker behavior that was making the complaint, like that was driving the complaint. So there's a large what if behind the scenes here. But if we go that it's a people problem, yes. And then also we don't know what's missing is like, did the paperwork get documented? There's a lot of what ifs in this scenario, obviously, but would you want to understand the retaliation piece? Yes. Based on level of behavioral issue, it may be, yeah. These are all great things. And yes, HR must be involved once a formal complaint is made, not hearing it through the grapevine. I think that's the piece right there. The HR person was brought in through the grapevine. They didn't hear it until the last moment, not when even the formal complaint was made. They're hearing it much later. So I think in this instance, we're seeing that the manager's reaction was too lackadaisical, in my opinion, to use fancy words. All right, so if we lay this out and run it through our framework and we apply our framework to the scenario, question one, is it policy or people? This looks like a people problem. A conflict between coworkers, but the manager turned it into a policy problem by bypassing HR. Now we have two things to deal with instead of one. Who needs to be involved? So who needs to know? Word is already out. Obviously, we heard it from the grapevine as HR, so confidentiality window is closed before HR was ever in the room. That makes everything harder, and it's a direct result of the manager going informal. So, yeah, who needs to know? Everybody knows already. What's consistent? Ask, has this manager done this before? Has HR been bypassed on complaints before? If yes, that pattern is its own risk. If no, this may be a training issue. So that is something to consider, especially for this manager. And then the last question we want to apply here, documentation. You're now documenting backwards in this scenario. The complaint, the manager's informal intervention, the retaliation claim, all of it needs to be captured now after the fact. That's always harder to defend in these types of scenarios. So if we had applied, if our manager had these questions in hand beforehand and potentially had a framework that they were working off of, these questions could be avoided later on, or these types of issues could be avoided. The moment the word retaliation enters the conversation, the situation changes category entirely. What started as a conflict is now a potential legal exposure. The manager didn't create that with bad intentions. He created it by acting without a process. So the underlying thing we want to drive here is we want to create a process where the manager is not reacting in a way that's going to drive exposure and legal risk. Yes, the manager just put himself at risk by not investigating the situation. Yes, we need to provide them with a process that will allow them to wear the hat of the investigator a little bit right up front so that it doesn't become that way. Managers often struggle with what they think is the gray area of bringing in HR unnecessarily or not looping them in when they should. Yep, absolutely, Matt. All right. Well, let's go into our next scenario. So, scenario two, everyone knew she was struggling. So, this should feel really similar to a lot of you on here. So, reading through this scenario, we have an employee who is terminated for employee performance, right? During her process, she says she was never formally told her job was at risk. Her last two performance reviews, both rated meets expectations. The manager's response, everyone knew she was struggling. The paper trail says a completely different story than what was actually happening. Her last two reviews were meets expectations, not struggling, not on notice, meets expectations. The manager isn't lying when he says everyone knew she was struggling. The problem is the documentation doesn't say that. And in an employment dispute, the documentation is the reality. So, with that, what do we think here? What would you coach your manager to do differently before it got here? A termination should never be a surprise to an employee. This termination is very risky as the documentation. Yep. Incomplete and inconsistent. Document. Yes. All coachings and conversations with signatures. Signatures. Yes, Allison, to create the paper trail. Jody, that's a process problem. Managers should be held accountable for not document correctly. Prior to a term, we would make sure the, yep, are in line and we have documentation. Brene Brown's clear is kind advice. Yep. I like that, Julie. Clear is kind. Have honest and authentic conversations, regular touch bases. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Yep. Review should not have marked meeting expectations if that was inaccurate. We do not allow a termination without HR involvement. I would have already been involved to make sure documentation supported the termination. Good. Yeah, Melanie, that's good. We love to hear that. All right. Properly document. Yeah. See, we're all thinking like HR. We love to see it, but managers don't think like HR. They don't think like that. They think they have a poor performing employee, and the performing employee should just know that. Sometimes they just think that they should just do better and they should just fix it themselves. They shouldn't have to tell them to do better. That sometimes is a training issue with the manager, that they should be maybe better trained as a manager to support their employees better. And not just assume that the employee knows that they're not doing their job. Um, so it's kind of thinking through those kind of things, but yes, all great comments in the chat. So let's see what the four questions surface here. So as we think through policy or people, classic policy to practice gap, the policy performance management process exists, but it wasn't applied honestly. The meets expectations rating is a policy artifact that now contradicts the termination decision. Um, who needs to who needs to know? Legal needs to know about this immediately. The documentation problem creates exposure, and the sooner the organization understands that, the better. Um, what's consistent? How have other underperformers been handled? If other employees received honest ratings and went through a PIP process, a performance improvement plan process, and this employee didn't, that inconsistency is exploitable and not legally defendable. Um, so you want to fix that, and address that. Documentation. This is the one that keeps HR up at night and all of us stressed out and gray hair sprouting from all that head. So yeah, that is what is going to keep us stressed out. The documentation doesn't just fail to support the decision, it actively undermines it in this situation. Two meets expectation reviews are evidence she was performing adequately. So that's just going to tell a completely different story and is not defendable. So in this situation, everyone knew is not a defense. Performance reviews that don't reflect reality are worse than no reviews because they create a paper trail that contradicts what you're trying to do. The time to document performance concerns is when they're happening, not when you're already deciding to terminate. And your managers should understand this. And again, this is where you coach your manager and maybe get additional training for your managers to understand how important the performance review and just having regular touch base conversations with their employees are. Yeah, I'm using like $1,000 term words here today. Yes, exploitable. I love that. You see this round. Yes. I believe it is being recorded today, so it is going to be recorded. Document, document, document. Yes. All right. So, that being said, let's go into our next scenario. Our next scenarios is one that is most representative of real life in HR. It's a messy and it doesn't have a clean category. It's very yeah. It doesn't fit neatly into a box, and most things don't. So an employee comes to HR feeling uncomfortable with a coworker's behavior, kind of similar to the first one. She's not sure if it counts as harassment. The behavior isn't sexual in nature, all right? The behavior is frequent personal comments, not sexual, but relentless and targeted. She does not want to file anything formal. She just wants it to stop and is asking HR to make that happen quietly. What would you coach your manager to do when the employee says, I don't want to file anything? Now, some of us have dealt with this before. Some of us have not. What we coach our manager to do? This is where a lot of HR professionals get stuck because the employee is asking for an outcome, but restriction is restricting the tools you can use to get there. A legal line has been crossed. Investigating and taking action is not negotiable. Yes. I mean, she's bringing it up, so obviously she's wanting something done. Whether it's formal or not, it has already been said. Yep. Depending on the severity and specific information, that promise may not be possible. HR manager should do an interview of the complaining employee. Yep. All good responses. Absolutely. So it's obviously a gray zone. HR should engage in the interview dialogue with complainant and alleged harasser. Yeah. It may not rise to the occasion, but it needs to be looked at. Absolutely, 100%. I mean, she's obviously bringing the complaint up to someone and she wants it addressed. At the end of the day, it has to be looked at. It may not be looked at in the way that she wants it accomplished. As we all know, it will need to be addressed in a certain way. But she is wanting something done. So regardless, it does need to be addressed. So let's apply our four questions. So is it policy or people? Both in this instance. And that's what makes this hard. And that's what makes it a gray zone. It may not be a policy violation yet, but it's a people situation with clear escalation risk if it is left undressed. Unaddressed. The answer to question one shapes everything else in this scenario. Who needs to know? This is the most critical question in this scenario because the employee wants to keep it confidential. And in this scenario, in a harassment type scenario, whether it's sexual or not sexual in nature, it should be kept confidential. You can honor that intent while still creating a record. Informal means no formal complaint. It doesn't mean no documentation in this instance. Um, is it what's consistent here? Has this coworker been a problem before? Has the employee raised concerns before? So pattern here is really going to matter as you start going down the rabbit hole. If there's a history on either side, the informal framing around the gray area starts to get a little less gray and more into the black. So it'll get harder to sustain. And then documentation. Document the conversation, the employee's request, and what HR did in response. Even if it says employee raised concerned informally, HR documented at employee's request not to file, HR will monitor. If that is even the most basic of your documentation, at least you've done the most basic, and that is a record. That is protection for you as the employer. Um, and then you kind of go from there depending on where your investigation at that point goes. And that gets into investigation. And again, this is not an investigation. Um, the gray zone is exactly where liability starts to grow. Doing nothing because a situation doesn't fit neatly into one category or another, harassment or policy violation, it's its own risk. Informal is a process choice, not a documentation choice here. Just keep that in mind. Those are two different things. So that is how this process would play out in this kind of framework. And you can kind of see how it helps kind of make decision-making points here when you do have such a gray area and how your manager can apply this as well. So with that, that is our third scenario. So this might be a quick little webinar today, but I wanted to make sure we had this employee investigation, not investigation, navigating employee relations conversation because we've been getting a lot of these kind of questions through the hotline, and I want to step back from the scenarios and be honest about what actually makes employee relations hard in a real organization because it's not usually about not knowing the rules. Managers act before HRs know anything. The hardest isn't fixing employee relations situations. It's preventing managers from making them worse in the first moment when the situation initially occurs. That's a training and culture issue, not just a policy issue. The four questions aren't just for you, the HR person, or the person wearing the HR hat. They're for the managers you coach. The second truth is consistency is the hardest thing to achieve. When every situation feels unique or a gray area, applying standards evenly takes real discipline. That's exactly what makes a repeatable framework valuable. You're not trying to remove judgment. You're trying to make sure that judgment is applied consistently using that framework. And then the last one, truth, is documentation never feels urgent until it is. And documentation always feels like a busy work. Nobody fills out the form proactively because it feels like overhead. But the value of that documentation isn't visible until you actually need it. By then, it's too late to create it. And this one is of the most important things you can instill in the managers you work with because they will sit there and they're like, I don't have time to create said document that you need. I just need to go do my work. I have to fill out that. I have to go help the guys on the floor, or I have to go do that call with the client. I have to go support the employees. We get it, but if you don't do the document, that's going to be getting us in hot water. Which of these three truths feel most relevant to your organization right now? You can drop it in the chat as a number, or you can shout it out. Consistency, documentation, three. Yep. Three, two, and three. Ooh. Two. Consistency. One. Oh, one. Two. Documentation and notifying HR. Yep. A lot of variety going on. Yeah. This here is the reason I wanted to host this type of topic as a wow session because I felt that this was the core of what I've been hearing a lot from a lot of my HR people, a lot of my members lately. And I wanted to make sure we had something that would address something that you guys could take away and have as a good leave behind for yourselves and something that you could potentially hand to your managers and coach your managers for. That being said, okay. Here's your take home. This is the coaching cheat sheet. You can screenshot this one too if you want, but again, I'm going to send this out to you after today's session, so you'll have this as a leave behind. So when your manager calls you in a panic, and sometimes they do, you all know who I'm talking about. You have a person in mind. These are four things you can walk them through in this language, not HR policy language. This is coaching language, right? So before you do anything else, so question one, before you do anything else, is this a rule that was broken or a relationship that's broken? And they need, this question alone will stop a lot of managers from making a bad first move. They need different responses, right? Question two, stop and think about who you've already told. Confidentiality matters from the first conversation. Most managers don't think about this until it's too late, right? Question three, how have we handled something like this before? If you treat this person differently than someone else, that's a problem. So this is the consistency check-in in plain language. And then question four, write down what happened, what was said, and what you decided. Even if it seems minor, do it today. The word today is doing a lot of work in that sentence. That's important because that's going to help you with your documentation trail. That's the framework, that's the application. And this is super easy, and you just hand it to them. Or you could just walk them through it over the phone if you don't want to hand it to them. Or you can just make it your own because you'll have it in a slide deck. All right. I'm going to potentially give you guys some time back in your day because that is towards the end of my presentation. The think before you react, coach before they react. That's the whole session in 2 lines. The framework works because it's the same 4 questions every time. You're not trying to become an employee relations expert. I'm not trying to force you to become one. You're trying to build a habit. So that's when a situation lands, you slow down enough to think instead of just respond. The real value is in teaching this to the manager you work with. The goal is to make yourself a better coach, not just a better HR professional. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you, Michelle. Um, that's what I'm going to leave you with. I didn't even put pandas in today's presentation, so you didn't have to worry about taking them out of today's presentation. So this is going to be straight up. You can take it as a leave behind. I'm going to give you a couple minutes back in today, unless you have any kind of questions. Yep, take emotion out and help managers use their mind. Yes. Um, yep, on documenting employee issues for your supervisors. Yep, Matt, we do have a, also, if you do find yourself in a spot where you need more of the investigation side, we have an HR toolkit on your member dashboard for HR investigations. So check that out. If you find yourself needing supervisor training, you know who to reach out to. That is Matt. Matt Weidman is your guide. Um, and yes, awesome. So if you ever need anything else, please feel free to reach out. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, great weekend. And this has been recorded, so it'll be also a leave behind in your thank you email today. So I will see you all next month. Bye, everyone.